Howdy y'all, I'm Katz, and today is going to be part one of shaping amigurumi using short rows. So what are short rows? Short rows are pretty much what they sound like. We're going to cut our row short and then build more stitches into it, essentially building up the fabric so that then when we close it off, we get this nice little bulge going on, which is going to bend and shape our pieces. Now you see short rows a lot in garment construction. Because we're adding this extra fabric, it's a really good way to shape around busts or shape for shoulders or hips or kind of anywhere where you just need a little bit of extra fabric. So what we're going to cover in today's video is two methods of doing the short rows. We're going to have a quick little chat about which one I like more, which one I would like less, and why. And then I'm going to show you how to achieve some specific angles using this method. Well, this method specifically, but you will learn about that in a few. So let's get going. All right, so this first method is going to be called the flap method. And what we're going to do is we're going to start at the widest point of our short row and then slowly work up to a point, and then we're going to close it all off to get back to our regular kind of crocheting. So to demonstrate it, we're going to use this little tube, and this is 6 rows with 12 stitches in joined rounds. And we're going to do our short rows over half of these stitches, so over 6 stitches. So let me give you this little visual so that you can kind of understand what we're going to be doing. So on this image, the circles, open circles, are going to be our stitches, and then that little bent arrow is where we're starting from. So when we have 12 stitches, we can kind of think of it as 4 different clusters of 3 stitches, right? So I know that I want to do mine over 6 of those stitches, and I would like to kind of center it in the back just because it makes it easier for the tutorial. But you would do that centering wherever you want the outside of your curve to be, let's say. But for this one, we're going to center it in the back. So I know that looking at this image, if I color in those 6 circles that are centered in the back, now I have to do 3 stitches, then 6 stitches to get to the beginning of my short row, and then we'll start working from there. Got it? Okay. Future Cats here. Hey, I just wanted to mention the way that we're going to be writing out our short rows. So I think it keeps everything best organized if we just take whatever row we're working on and then subdivide that into its short row sections. So for both of our sample pieces, we're going to be starting our short rows in row 8, and I'm just going to subdivide those into the short rows. Also in this written out section, you're going to notice it'll be something like 3 single crochet, 6 single crochet, and that's just there so you can kind of keep a mental map in reference to the image of where we are in constructing the short rows. But anyways, back to past cats. So I'm at the beginning of this round, and I know that I need to do 3 single crochets. So there's 1, there's 2, and 3. Now, this would be where my short rows, or the base of that short row is getting started, and I know that it needs to be 6. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. All right, so now we're gonna do the short rows and start those, and we're gonna do it just like its name says. So this row is short because we didn't complete it. I'm gonna turn my work. I like to turn against my work because it's going to make it easier to find our stitches when we come back. Notice that I did not chain here. We don't want to chain because we don't want to add extra bulk. So without chaining, I'm going to go into that next stitch, or into the stitch that I just worked. Sorry. And single crochet. Now I'm going to do 6 single crochets to finish off that short row. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's going to be our first section of our short row. And now we're going to turn and do that again, but we're not going to go to the end of the round, right? Because we're trying to build a triangle. So we are only going to do 5 stitches this time. So I'm going to go back without chaining into that same stitch. You see that? and then I'm gonna do 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I'm leaving this last stitch here unworked because that's what we're going to use to kind of close off everything when we do our final round. Oops, we gotta get that. But this is all we're going to do, right? Is we're just going to continue to step our piece down. So after we did those 5, I'm not going to chain, but I am going to turn, going into that same stitch. The reason that that I have to pull my yarn down when I turn is because I'm going against my work, which is a little bit trickier on the turn, but it's definitely worth it. So we just did 5, so I'm only going to do 4 this time. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to turn again, going into that same stitch, right in the back here. And I'm going to do 3 across this one. 1, 2, and 3. Then, you guessed it, we're going to turn. I'm going to go into here, same stitch that I just worked into, and do 2. All right. Now, this is the end of our flap. So remember how I said we'd be making like this little triangular like flap? That's what I'm talking about. So now we're going to incorporate this flap back into the piece. So I'm going to do that is I'm going to do just like I have done and turn. One thing that's very important when we're working this style or any of the short rows in general is when we are going to go to complete that round that we are doing the short rows in, we want to make sure that we're going into the same direction that we were going before we started, right? So I was over here working in this direction. So when I finish my short row, I want to work into this direction. And the reason for that is it's easy to see when we're doing these joined rounds, but these are all stitches that we haven't done yet, right? Because we did short rows. So we need to make sure that we complete this whole round before going back and adding more stitches on this side. And that's what these steps kind of help to provide too, is they allow us to add those extra stitches on that other edge. That's kind of like some advanced shit that you don't really need to know about, but you know, knowledge is power. So we have 2 stitches on our top row, right? So I'm gonna do my 1 single crochet into here, and then 2. And the next, actually, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna mark, this stitch can be a little tricky to find, that like first one that we do. So let's just go ahead and put a stitch marker in that just so that we know that we go into the right one. You'll see what I mean. They kind of get slanted on that side. All right, so my next stitch is actually gonna be this one that we didn't work into. So I'm gonna go all the way down into here and I'm gonna do a single crochet. Now, your work will tend to kind of buckle, but we're gonna expect that. So now we're gonna go into our next one, next available one, and go down and do that. Those are really poking out for us because of the way that we turned against our work. And now I'm back at the base. Now, if you're having trouble finding your stitches, just remember that we should have 3 left over. So I can see that there's my slip stitch, or there's my chain, there's my slip stitch join right here. And then I got 1, 2, 3 stitches, and I'm gonna go in that available one. We're not going into this one that has a stitch in it, we're going into the next one. And that will be 1, 2, and 3 to finish off that round. So super easy. Now your thing might be poking out the wrong way, but we'll just flip that over because we're gonna start working into it. So now our crochet is back on track. We've got full rounds that we're gonna be working in. And if we actually take a peek at this bad boy, now the opening for the round that we're working in is kind of pointing off to the side, as opposed to before when we were working flat. You see how the opening is kind of pointed out? Perfect. So let's go ahead and do this first round. Now this first round, we're gonna have to go up the steps on the other side. This yarn is just like fighting with me today. What is going on, girl? It's okay. All right, sweet. So let's go ahead and join this round with a slip stitch and chain. And now we're just gonna do our normal 12 single crochets that we'd find in a round. So I'm gonna go in. So we should have 1, right? 2, and then 3, which is right before our step up. Remember, we did the math, so we know that we're 3 stitches, then 6. So our next stitch is actually gonna be up onto that little step that we made. So it'll be this stitch right here. Let me see if I can get that better in focus. So that stitch right there. That's why it's kind of important to do those turning against your works. If you don't like that method, or if you're still having trouble kind of finding those stitches, feel free to mark them. You know, there's no harm in that. You'll just mark every stitch that you don't complete on your short row. So then my next stitch goes into this next top right up there. So I'm gonna go into here and do my single crochet. Now here's why I wanted to mark that stitch. So we do know that because we just worked into this one, that our next stitch is gonna be up on a bump, but do you see how slanted that kind of space gets right there? I just think it's, you know, easier to mark it. You can identify it, right? It's the only one that has like a V that's continuous, but why work harder when you can work smarter? I'd rather not spend the time trying to identify it. All right, so we'll take out that, and then we'll put our last single crochet into there. And now is technically when that full short rows are completed. So now we'll just work down just like normal. So I'm just gonna go into my next stitch over here. Oop, single crochet, I twisted that one up right fierce. And then next stitch right here. In this section, it's kind of easier to hold your thing sideways, because if we're going up here, it almost looks like we didn't work into that stitch, but we know that we did. So kind of keeping your eye on it and keeping everything kind of sideways right here helps you identify these stitches. And as always, we can always just kind of go back and count to make sure that we have the right amount of stitches. When we're doing short rows with this method, this final, all of these rows, once they're completed, should be 12 stitches, right? We're not adding and we're not subtracting anything. We're just kind of forcing it to move in a different direction. So let's go ahead and count these. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Right? Did I just count that wrong? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, okay, we're good. Whew, thought I miscounted there for a second. Worst YouTuber ever. Just kidding, I'm the best. All right, so now we're just gonna continue, and we can see even now how much more that's kind of formed over to the side, really getting that flap in there. So I think you kind of got the speed of this. I'm going to just do a few more rows, and then we will, I'll be back here and we'll kind of fill it up. All right. Okay, so brief check-in here. I've done a few rows and we can already see that shape kind of coming forth. All right, pretty rad. So I'm gonna just do a couple more rows, stuff it, and then we should be good. We'll kind of discuss it after that. All right, let's go. Okay, so let's get into stuffing, because that's really going to help kind of accentuate this shape. Now, there isn't a hard or fast rule for this, but you know, you want to do your standard stuffing guides. We want to pull our stuffing apart so that it doesn't get lumpy, and then we really want to follow the curve, right? So the stuffing's going to kind of help us achieve this. You might know, if you've done some other amigurumi, that you can like purposefully not fill sections to make it a little bit more bendy than other ones would, or you can overfill a section to really make it bulge out. But here we've done all the shaping work, right? So we kind of are just looking to get a smooth, consistent amount of stuffing in all of our piece. Cool. This hook size is also a little bit too big for this yarn. Well, it's the recommended hook size, so it's a little too big for amigurumi, but it's the right size for this yarn. But I went with that bigger hook size just so that you can see it, because the other one that I have that I would normally use for this size of yarn is the exact same color as the yarn, which is not going to be helpful for you guys. But yeah, so I think we've got a good kind of even fill on here. So I'm just going to close it up, and then we'll give a little chat about this. That stuffing kind of worked in there. But there we have it. We have a nice kind of 45-degree angle bend. Kind of overstuffed that one side. But yeah, so we got a nice 45-degree angle bend, and that was all done with those short rows. So remember that flap method. So in the flap method, what we're doing is we're going to go from our widest section up to the smallest one. So next, I'm going to show you another method, and then we'll kind of compare these together. So I will see you in just a second. Okay, so this next method, we'll call it the bump method. So previously, we worked our widest section of our short row and then went back to make a point and a flap. But in this one, we're actually gonna work our shortest section of our short row and then work it out side to side, making kind of like a bump. So let's look at this graphic again to kind of see what we're doing to start this off. So we've got the same base, 12 stitches around, 6 rows, joined rounds. Symbols are still the same. Arrow is where we're starting and the direction we're going, and the circles are the stitches. So again, I want to center this into the middle of the back, but because we're building the shortest section of the short row first, we kind of want to think about where that middle part is and then put our stitches on either side of that. So I know half of my row width is going to be 6 stitches, and I want it centered in the back. So that first cluster of 3 is going to just be 3 single crochets. Then the next one, I'm going to do 2 singles, and then that third one is going to be the start of my short row, and the next one will be the end of that first short row. Does that kind of make sense? So we'll see, and then we'll build out from there. Okay. So let's go finish off this round. So as per our chart, we want 3 single crochets to begin with. So that's my 1, 2, 3. Now we're hitting that second cluster where I want 2. And then this next stitch is going to be the first one of my short rows. Then the next stitch would be the second of my short rows. And that's going to be the actual first short row. It's just those 2 single crochets. Now, like that other one, we're going to turn, but we actually are going to chain with this one. So I'm going to chain, and then I'm going to turn. And when we're working up our short rows this way, we're going to skip that first stitch. So I'm skipping that first stitch of our short row, doing a single crochet into the next one. And that would technically be over those first 2 bumps of our short row. So now to expand our short row, I'm just going to go into the next stitch. And that adds 1 on that side. Then that's the end of that first return. So now I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to turn, and I'm going to do the same thing where I skip this one. So I'm skipping that first one on that return, doing a single crochet. Now, we just skipped one, right? But we'd still need to put a single crochet into that. But in order to kind of work down on this bump, we're going to put it into the leg of the single crochet that we made. So if I kind of pull this up to you close, that little 2 things right there, that V, that's going to be the V of the chain stitch that we used to switch over. So then if we look at the side here, we have these 2 bumps, and those bumps are going to be the leg of that single crochet. So I'm going to go into those 2 bumps like that. They can be a little hard to see, and you do want to make sure you go through both of them. Kind of think about this in the same manner as when we were doing the edge stitches on the Tunisian crochet. So on those edge stitches, we have 1 bump here and then another kind of shorter one. So that's what we're going to go into. It's kind of the same idea and method, or same principle rather. We go through both of them because it creates, it stops gaps from happening, which is the whole point of doing it this way. So I'm just taking it into 2 steps just to make sure that I can get back underneath both of them. And you'll feel there's a little bit of resistance in there, and that's going to be the other part of that single crochet. If you don't feel that resistance and you're just going straight through, then you've missed those 2 stitches and you picked up that one in the back that's kind of hard to see. But anyways, there's my single crochet that would complete those 3 stitches for this return of that short row. and then I'm gonna widen it by 1. So I'm gonna go back down into my next available stitch. Remember, this one, the unworked one, is my next available. So I'm gonna go down into that, and that would be stitch number, what would that be, 4 of our row, right? We just worked over the 3, then we added 1 to be 4. So I'm gonna chain 1 and turn. I'm gonna skip that first one. I'm gonna work 1. I'm gonna work 2. Those are the 2 that we already had made in that row. Then I have my 1 that's the chain that I skipped, which I'm not gonna work into, but I still need that stitch. So I'm gonna go into the side and go over those 2 stitches, or go into that, both of those legs rather. That makes more sense. And then I'm gonna do 1. And that would complete that pass. So we'd have the 1 that we skipped, 2, 3, 4, and now we'll expand by 1, which would be our stitch number 5. So then do the same thing, get a chain, turn. So I'm going to skip that 1. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. There's my skip loop. So I'm going to go into my side, picking up both legs for my 4th one. Let's see if I get in there. Get in, go on, get. All right, cool, got it. And then my next available stitch, which is down here, which would be my 6th stitch, right? I expanded to 5 on here. I'm going over and I expand to my 6th, which means that I've worked over all 6 of those stitches and that short row is complete. So now I'm just going to continue. And we know that's true because we have 3 stitches left. So good on us. 1, 2, and 3. And then let me show you how we're going to work this next row. So remember that we skipped some stitches, right? And we were working those into the sides of the previous round, and that's how we're going to do this too. So I've got my 1, my 2, and my 3. Then, in order to make that short row correct, I'm going to need to work into that little side bump, right? So if I hold this up, this one's going to be a lot harder to find. So this bump right here would be the short one if we were coming the other way. Here, let me show you. So if I was working into it from this side, I would have that little leg right here and that little leg right there. So let me take this leg here, leg here. There's the stitch that I want to work into. Now, when we look at that from this front side, it's a little bit trickier, right? So we have this one that looks like it's coming up from nowhere. Then we have this next one. This is the one that we want. We want this next one. So, to identify it one more time, I have a loop coming up, and I want the one directly above it. So I'm going to work into those 2 legs. That's going to be my 4th stitch of the round. Now, when we look at the top, here's the one that we skipped. It got pulled tighter because we just worked that stitch. So I'm going to work into this next one right up here. So it almost looks like I'm skipping. It's kind of a far jump, but we're doing it right because we put that one that we skipped in there. So this was my 5th stitch of the round, 6, and the rest of this is going to be normal because we already have those singles there. So 7, 8, 8 maybe, 9, 10, 11, and 12. See, we did it right. And that's going to be that version, that bump version of a short row. So we worked from the small side and we worked back and forth to get up to this larger side. And then we're just going to continue like normal. So we're just going to do some single crochets around. Everything is set up pretty nice and easy at this point. We don't have any like little worries that we have for like the stitches that we skipped or anything. So I'm just going to do a few of these rounds. I'm going to stuff it, close it off, and then we'll come back to kind of have a little chat and compare what these two methods kind of look like. All right, let's go. Now I'm making sure, real quick, just that I'm putting fluff into that bump to kind of help fill it out. I'm purposefully placing some in that space that we created right here. It's the same kind of concept if you're like making a bear or something, if it has little ears, you're making sure that you're putting stuffing that's directly dedicated to those ears. Same thing with like other parts of the body. You're putting some in the arms to make sure that the arms are stuffed up. No different here with the bend. Okay. Nice. All right, I'm just going to close this off. Okay. So there we are, another little 45-degree angle guy made in a completely different way. So next up, let's compare these two different methods together and then have a chat about a couple more things. All right, see you in a sec. All right, time for our discussion. So what do I think about these two different methods? Visually, I think they're pretty much exactly the same. You can't really tell the difference. I would say that there's maybe a little bit more gaps in this flap method, but both of them are kind of showing it. Though I do think that you'll see in smaller yarn, the gaps on the bump method are mostly closed. I would say that, though, truthfully, this is kind of a pick your preferred method favorite because they're both going to kind of turn out the same. I would say that the bump method, though, to do color work along it is going to be a little bit easier just because since we're constantly going to have the stitches working continuously, it's easier to work the color work into them as opposed to our flap, right, where we're working in steps. So you can't really pull up the new color as easily. It's doable. You just kind of have to think about it a little bit more. Unless you're doing stripes. I suppose if you're doing stripes, the flap might be a little bit easier, but again, pick your favorite, pick the one that's going to be best for the situation. I do like this bump method more, so I'm going to show you some more swatches about how to control the angle of this, and all of them are going to be using that bump method, but I'll explain how you can apply the same principle to the flap if that's what you like more. So let's take a peek at these guys. So yeah, like I said, all done with that bump method. We have the pink here that is just representing the rows that I worked as short rows. Then our cylinders are going to be joined rounds of 18 stitches. So the way that I controlled this angle is by making the largest section of the short rows and just changing that. So for example, to get this right angle, what we did is we did our largest short row is all of the stitches in the row, right? And that gave us a 90-degree angle. So if we think about this bump-wise, we'd start in the center and then we keep on picking up stitches until we reach all the stitches in the round, and then that would be our short row to get the 90 degrees. If we were doing it with the flap method, we would first work all the way across the round, then we'd go up and we'd start working our steps until we got to the end, which in this case would be 3, and then we would work all the way around. Pretty simple. So then to get this guy that's like, I don't know, maybe 110 degrees, we used 3/4 of the stitches around for our largest short row. Then to get 100 and let's say 30 degrees, we did half of our stitches, which is exactly what we did in the tutorial. Then to get this one that's 150, we did about 1/4 of our stitches. So super easy method to control the angle, pretty intuitive. You can kind of look at these and then go where you want to, change the amount of stitches, find some cool angles in the middle of them. But some of you might be thinking in your head, those keen-eared listeners, I thought you said these had 18 stitches. And I would say, yes, they do have 18 stitches. And then you'd be like, well, then please tell me what 3/4 of 18 is. And I'd have to say 13.5. So let me explain how we figure out how to center those kinds of weird stitch counts to really make these pieces work. So I think the way we're going to do this is I'm going to show you kind of like that map that we used at the beginning, and we'll go over it one more time using the same kind of shape that we did in the tutorial. So I'm going to pull up that map again. So we have 18 stitches represented by the circles. That arrow with the line on it just is our starting position and the direction that we're working in. And then we have this dotted line here just to separate the two halves. So I have 9 stitches on the top and 9 stitches on the bottom. So when we're thinking of where to put this short row piece that we know we want to be half of our stitches, what we need to do is figure out what half of 18 is, which is 9, and then we need to find a way to orient those 9 stitches so that they're centered. And I can do that by going to that little top section. If I mark that center stitch right there, and then I count out 4 on each side, I've made 9. right? So I have 9 centered stitches that are good to go. Pretty easy to understand. The thing that I kind of want to highlight here is we're using an odd number. So we have a stitch that's in the center, and then we have stitches that are going off of it, right? In the previous one, let me pull that up real quick just so you can kind of see what I'm trying to highlight. So in the previous one, where we had 12 stitches, half of 12 is 6, which is an even number, which means we don't have that center one marked anymore because it's just an even number of stitches that we need to do. That marked one is going to be really important when we talk about this next step. So let's look at this one that is 3/4 of our stitches. So we have the same blank map. I'm going to go ahead and mark that center stitch at the top because we're going to need it. And now if we think about what 3/4 of 18 is, it's going to be 13.5. So we need to kind of figure out a way to work around 13.5 that's going to give us even stitches on both sides for our short rows, but then also for the rows that we're not going to be working in for our short rows. And to do this, we want to think of that center point as like a null stitch, maybe a anchor. It might be a good way to kind of think about it. And we don't necessarily want to go over the 13. We want to be somewhere within the realm of it. So the way that I did this one is I just forgot about that 0.5, get rid of it. I don't like her, I don't know her, she doesn't go here. And we'll think of that center stitch as our anchor. And then we'll take 13 minus that 1 for our anchor stitch is 12. So we need 6 stitches on each side. And that's going to make a nice looking centered thing. The reason that we're not going to just switch it to 14 stitches instead of doing the 13.5 is 1, 14 is not odd. So we're not going to be able to center it nicely on 9 stitches. So in order to do that, we would need to do 15 stitches, which is adding too much. You know, we can kind of fudge 1 stitch, but fudging 2 stitches is when you've essentially just done an increase, you know, so there's some massive differences. So let's look at this again with the one that we're working in the quarter of our stitches, just so you can kind of see again what I mean. So let's bring up our pictogram again. So we got it up there blank. We're gonna mark that middle stitch up at the top. And let's think about this. So 1/4 of 18 is going to be 4.5. Again, we have another number that's even with some change, and we know that we need an odd number. So for this one, I am actually going to go up. So I'm going to pretend that it's 5, and I'm going to put one stitch, or one of the stitches as that anchor stitch, and then I'm going to find 2 stitches on each side. The reason that I'm not going to go down in this instance is because I know that's going to create a shallower curve. And you might need to experiment when you're working on your own piece to kind of figure out how much of an effect that is. But in my head, if I wanted to make something that's going to be more recumbent than this, I would use those 3 stitches, right? But I'm trying to get something that's going to be a little bit more angled, so I'm going to bump it up to that 5. Again, you know, a lot of crochet work and crochet design is mathematical, but also a lot of it is vibe based. You know, I can't tell you that this is the correct one or that's the correct one. It's kind of an experiment and trying to figure it out. But yeah, so that's how you would kind of map those things out. So I hope that was not super confusing and a little bit more helpful for planning your own things. Now, I wanted to do one kind of wacky Joker mode experiment. And I think this kind of also is going to highlight some of my, what would you call them? Some of my apprehensions with short rows in the round. But this is just done by combining 2 of our full round short rows into 2 to get this kind of U shape, which is kind of fun and goofy. So we worked our tube, we worked our short rounds going through every stitch. Then after I completed that row, we did another short round of all those stitches, and then we finished off our tube. Now, one thing that you might notice is this looks lumpy as all get out. And this is kind of to highlight some of the things with short rows. So one thing that is kind of weird is when we think about working in the round, we have all of our stitches facing the same way in this nice manner. But as soon as we go to short rows, we start working and we have the fronts of our stitches and the backs of our stitches showing. So it really changes the visual flow of our piece. Even on one of these guys, we can kind of see that, right? We have our nice stitches that are in a row, and then we have what I personally think looks a little messy. You see that? And then also, when we think about the way that tension is held in our stitches, the tension control is going to be completely different when working in the round versus working in rows. When you're working in rounds in crochet, this is kind of hard to explain, but it's kind of like the same concept as when we were talking about Tunisian. So a crochet stitch is pulling on the front of the fabric. So it's going to be leaning towards you when you're crocheting. When you turn it around and work on the wrong side of the fabric, if like when you're doing rows or when you're doing short rows, then you're having the tension being pulled back in the other direction. That's one of the reasons why you kind of get this banding effect. Part of it is your eye identifying or seeing the difference between the fronts and the backs of these stitches. But another part of it is the tension being switched back and forth pretty consistently. And when you're crocheting in rows, you might notice this by when you make your stitch and you flip to work on the wrong side of the fabric. It's almost like the tops of those stitches are facing away from you as opposed to being towards you. And that's kind of that tension being controlled by the fabric. Also, because of that banding, I feel like when you do this kind of style of crochet, you get these bumps where these short rows start. You know, you can see them there. You can kind of see it here. And then the reason I wanted to do this is you can really see where those bumps are. The reason that it's so prominent here is we've done 2 rows of our crochet essentially facing us, right? We have the row that closes our short round, then we have the other row that picks up that, that last stitch of that short round that we need. Then we start working back and forth again. So we have 2 rows that are pulling forward towards us, followed immediately by a row that pulls backwards, which is what's creating that like very distinct ridge there. And I know I'm kind of like talking disparagingly against short rows, this thing, but they really aren't bad. They are great. They are a really good way to kind of work these shapes in. And because of that inherentness of these changes in stitch patterns, it adds a great texture. There is a time when you'll want one of these. I think like maybe for like insects to kind of show joints, this is like a really cool technique where the thing that we're talking right now is maybe being not a flaw, but being distinct about this and maybe not as desirable, would be desirable in one of those situations. And that's why this is a part 1. Part 2 is going to show us another way to create these same kind of styles of shaping, but without using short rows or using short rows in a different manner. You'll see. But yeah, that's the video for this week. Stay tuned for part 2 where we learn that other method. That other method's kind of just like a little bit more advanced. So I wanted to kind of save it till we have this basic kind of concept down and then move on to that other method. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe. And leave a comment. Let me know what other techniques you'd like to see. Let's see we've got the new pattern coming up in a few weeks. I'll probably do part 2 of this, not next week, but the week after that. Yeah, I think that'll be the plan. But anyways, thank you guys for watching the video, and yeah, I'll see you guys later. Bye. I did just like badmouth them, but I don't want to sound really discouraging, right? Because like basically what I mean to say is that this is fine, just like a small little thing, but once we get bigger, it just gets absurd. Whatever, I'm just waffling at this point. Point being, you did good, kids. You did good.